Hello, it's Rachel. I'm here to discuss Kung Fu Season 2, Episode 10. So, the episode obviously starts with Ryan being brought to the hospital after he got shot by Russell Tan at the end of last week's episode. And so, as the Shen family's kind of in panic mode after this, Nikki feels guilty over the fact that she'd been withholding what she'd learned from Zhao. So, she finally discloses the prophecy relating to Mia. Unsurprisingly, it doesn't really go over well, and she practically gets banished from the hospital. So Nikki then decides to go to Henry's place instead of going back to her family home. And so, quick thing I want to mention, Evan comes to visit her there. As someone who's a multi-shipper who loves both Nikki Henry and Nikki Evan, I was very intrigued by this. It was a lot for me. Like, I know Evan was at Henry's apartment in last week's episode when the team was trying to come up with a plan for this mallet switch. But he seemed so comfortable there, and like reminder that this is the apartment of his ex's new boyfriend. And the way he was comforting Nikki in a way that pretty much only he could, given his history with her and her family, because Henry obviously doesn't have that since they met. I don't know the timeline in the show. Since it was last season, I'm gonna guess probably around a year ago, if not slightly less than that. So yeah, I'm feeling a lot of things. Writers, Evan, Nikki, Henry, Endgame, maybe, please. But anyway, back to the situation with Ryan. Tai Ma, Shannon Dang, Olivia Liang, and Tan Kinghua all did such an amazing job with the emotional scenes in this episode. Like Althea breaking down because she's stressed about her job, but it's impossible for her to think about all of that while her brother is in surgery. And then Nikki like stewing in this guilt because she feels responsible for the situation and wanting to push away her destiny as a warrior because of it. And then Mei Li practically being glued to Ryan's bedside because of her worry. But the scene that broke me was when Jin called Nikki to give her an update. And then, like, they talk for such a short time, he quickly hangs up and he started to sob before, like, he only allowed himself to do it for like 30 seconds and then he forced himself to, like, recompose himself because he knew he had to stay strong for the rest of the family. Like, just, ow. And Taima was so incredible in that scene. So, while all of this is happening with Ryan, Henry learns from the Wan's Eye that there's a ceremony that can stop Russell's plan. And it turns out that said ceremony would basically negate the warrior and guardian bloodlines. And so, as I kind of just said, Nikki's feeling helpless and frustrated, and she doesn't want this responsibility anymore. So she quickly jumps on board with this plan and goes back home to grab the Jusha. Unsurprisingly, when she does, she's immediately confronted by Xiao. And this scene was a lot. So Xiao is immediately defending her practice of eugenics that created these bloodlines. So, yikes. Like, when she told Nikki, your bloodline is what makes you special, like, just the alarm bells going off in my head. Like, it took me out, because I was like, I can't believe that was an actual line that was written. Holy shit. It's so fucked up. But when that appeal doesn't work to change Nikki's mind, Zhao hits us with the gut punch that this ceremony would kill Mia. Now, I don't think she's lying, especially given we saw Mia, like, I can't think of a better way to say this. She just, like, crumpled up in pain and, like, fell to the ground when they were trying to perform it. So I don't think Zhao is lying. But now that the concept, more or less, of Nikki being able to unburden herself of this warrior legacy has been introduced to the audience as a possibility, I think that Nikki being free of this and, like, being able to be quote-unquote normal would be the best way to wrap up the show. Like, especially since we've now learned of Zhao's practices that created these bloodlines, it feels kind of icky. And, like, I just hope there's a way to end it. Because it's weird. It's very weird. But Mia dying at the expense of ending these bloodlines is a horrendous price to pay. So obviously this method isn't viable to reach that endpoint. So of course, after this conversation with Zhao, Nikki changes her mind because she's not going to be responsible for her cousin's death. But when she tells Henry she's backing out, this causes an argument in which Henry says that he feels like Nikki is always making the final call on everything and he feels like his input never matters to her. So I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion or not, but I agree with what Henry was saying. I think I even mentioned in my review for the episode Jusha that I was getting kind of annoyed with Nikki because she was constantly ignoring Mia's input when Mia was like the person who was in actual immediate danger. Like, Mia's input is valuable. She deserves to have a say in these plans. But Nikki just kept insisting on her way. And this is by no means me trying to hate on Nikki. Like, she's one of my favorite characters. But she's been so controlling this season. And I'm glad Henry called her out on it. And I'm even more glad that when they made up at the end of the episode that Nikki said he was right and she apologized. She's not fighting alone, and while everyone else might see her as a leader of their team, they should be able to have a say, and she should take all of these viewpoints into consideration. And it feels like she hasn't been doing that this season. The episode then ends with Ryan waking up and reuniting with the rest of his family and telling Nikki they still have to fight for Mia before we then cut to Mia and Jalan. And so as I kind of mentioned, there had been scenes of the two of them intermittently through the rest of the episode, and they're kind of coming up with a plan of how they're going to be able to kill Russell. So we find out Jalan has been keeping tabs on his movements so they can ambush him, and the plan goes through. They kill all of these bodyguards that Tan had, but it turns out the person they ambushed was Juliet. They successfully grab her, and presumably, given the trailer for next week, they're going to torture her for information. So, not to be a sadist, but it was so satisfying to see Juliet scared when they brought her to Jalan's lair. Like, Juliet and Russell are such horrendous people, and I want to see them suffer. So I think next week will be pretty fun to see Russell being miserable and worried about Juliet, and to see Juliet suffering as a consequence of siding with him. I mean, I feel kind of evil ending my review on this note, but they really are just so horrible. Like, who purposefully creates a natural disaster to just, like, mass murder people? Like, what the hell? They need to rot. They need to rot. They're horrible. But anyway, if you'd like to share your thoughts, please leave a comment because, as always, I'd love to continue talking about the show. And I'll see you guys next week. Bye!